Welcome to the William Douglas Show.
Flow make digits, I'm on stack chicken like what it's gon' be. True in the cut, and you want us forever.
A few moments later.
Love is love. Bendo with the switch again. Hey man, you got it.
Well, let's just jump right into it. We're gonna go ahead and fit our rear legs to the back of the seat now. I left the angled dado in the rear legs a little bit short of the thickness of the seat. So now I'm just going to fine tune that until I can get it to fit nicely. And I'll show you how I do that. There's a couple different ways to do it. You can approach it by trying to remove some of this material, which is not easy because this is all end grain that you would be removing. So I would rather remove side grain from the seat to get it to fit. So that's what I do. And furthermore, I like to use my shoulder plane to do that, and I'll show you how I do that. But if you don't have one, you can use a sander, you can hand sand it, you can use a scraper, you can probably use a chisel. There's a lot of different ways you can remove material. This is just how I do it, so that's what I'll show you. All right, now that we have the rear legs fitted to the seat, the back of the seat, we now can get our final measurements for our backrest and get that cut down. So that's what we're gonna do now. To get the final dimensions for your backrest, you need to measure in between your legs. Make sure that this is clamped tight, you don't have any gaps here. And then you need to measure from here and all the way up and make sure that that measurement is the same. If it's not the same, you wanna go off of the lower number. The backrest is 11.5 inches. So what you can do is you can take a pencil and mark 11.5, which is, and this doesn't have to be perfect. And then I already marked it, actually, it's right here. Marked it earlier. So we got that mark and we got this mark. So if you are not even all the way, if it's not parallel all the way, then you need to measure from the lowest point, which is right here, the lowest point of the backrest. And then you need to use that measurement for your backrest. So if this is 13 1/8 down here and it's 13 1/4 up here, that means that your top is out a little bit. So you want to cut it to the smaller dimension, and then when you clamp it, it'll pull it in. If you cut it to the larger size and you force it in here, what it's going to do is it's going to push the legs out and open up your joint in between where your rear legs attach to the back of your seat. So hopefully, if everything that you did up until now was nice and square and all your tools were checked before you made any of your cuts, this shouldn't be an issue. You shouldn't have a consistent number from the bottom all the way up to the top. They will all be different though, because it comes down to how deep you went with your dado and how much you had to clean up the dado. If you had anything you had to address with that, that is what dictates the size of your backrest. So I have 13 3/16, and my backrest is 14 5/16, which converted to decimal is 14.3125, and the chair is 13.1875. So what I need to do now is I need to subtract and come up with a number. So we're going to go 14.3125 minus the chair, which was 13.1875, equals about 20,000 tims. Now what we need to do is we need to divide this by 2, and that tells me that I need to take 9/16 of an inch, which is 0.5625, off of each side of the backrest. Don't just go for that number, work your way to it. So I'm gonna cut that a little large, and then I'm gonna test fit it, and then I'll come back and I'll remove like a 32nd or a 64th at a time until I get that to fit just right. But whatever you take off the left side, make sure you remove the same amount off of the right side, so that this here, when it shrinks evenly. Otherwise you're gonna have a short one and a wide one. You don't want that. That's what we're gonna do now.
the weekend like usual.
Okay, so now we have our marks and we're going to cut them on the table saw. One important thing to note, a couple tricks, but one important thing to note is you want to cut these cuts the same as we did before. You want the center part of your backrest to be flat on here, and then you want to run that through the table saw this way. So what you're achieving is a 90-degree cut from the center point. You don't want to do this, because if you do this, you're going to get a 90-degree cut off of this, which is 12 degrees in total from that. So your cut will be 12 degrees out if you cut it like this. You want 90 degrees from here. So make sure that this is wings up and you push through. Another thing that's going to help, if you don't already know this trick, is we have our marks that we put there. I'm going to put my backrest flat against the fence here, and then I'm going to measure from the fence to my mark, which looks like it is about 13,000 TMs. It's about 13 and 13/16. So I'm going to set my fence to the blade at a hair over 13 and 13/16.
Wait, a hair over this way or this way?
Bigger.
Bigger, so more of a cut.
It's going to leave a little bit more. I want to make sure that this X that I have here, the blade is over here. I don't want to cut onto this line. I want to like ease my way to that line. So if I set the fence to the blade at 13 and 13/16, it's going to put the side of this blade right against my line, which in theory should be perfect, but I don't want to take any chances, so I'm going to scoot the fence over a little bit further so my blade is a little bit further away from my line, and then I'm going to work my way to that line.
Okay.
So now we have a perfect fit. I kissed the edges of the backrests with my hand plane until I got the perfect fit, and now this all looks fantastic. My joints are still tight here. My backrest seam is nice and tight on all sides, so this is good. This is right where I wanted. I just had to work my way to it. Don't rush that. If you rush that, you're just gonna end up with some gaps. If you're okay with gaps, then go ahead and rush it. So by now you got to be thinking, how does this joint attach? How do we attach the backrest to the legs? And you're not going to believe this, but it's actually super glue and baking soda and a little bit of painter's tape to hold it in place. I'm just kidding. We're going to use 3 loose tenons. So dominoes, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, or 2, 4, 6. Right, so we're gonna mark those out now. The only really important thing here that you need to be sure of is that you're flush here, and when you plunge in with your dominoes, you go in low enough. From this edge, you go in low enough. You wanna be a little bit lower than center, because if you're not, when you plunge into the backrest, you might come out right here.
Have you done that before?
I have done that before. All right, so now we're gonna get these loose tenons put into the backrest and the top of the rear legs. So what I want 3 loose tenons per side. So I'm gonna come down about here, and this is just eyeballing. Just eyeball it to the best of your ability, roughly center about there, and then somewhere about right here. Okay, and then I'm gonna take this, just any kind of square that you have. I like this one because it's flexible for this specific application. And I'm gonna just line this up close to my marks there. Notice I went right above my line because I want a clean starting point. This one I'll just go just below it. That's just because I don't want to get confused when I'm trying to plunge in with my domino, because that's really messy. I want a clean, crisp line. Okay, so like I said before, important detail is I have my setting on 28 TMs. And what you want to do is, again, we have our regular setting. I never use those two. Make sure you're on 25 because we're doing the backrest now and we don't want to accidentally come out because we're going straight in, not at this 12-degree angle. So if you go in too deep, you could accidentally come out. So keep this at 25, and also to check your work at 25 and at 28,000 TMs, you can see when I'm fully plunged in, I'm not going to come out of the top. That's what we need to make sure. Once you're sure of that, then you just need to line up your lines and plunge in. So we're going to hit all 6 of these and then move on to the legs. Okay, one more thing that I forgot to mention was make sure that when you're doing this, unfortunately this fence, it does not bend down. So there's no way to do that. Don't do this. This fence doesn't bend that way. It only bends the other way. You just need to hold this fence here flat against this edge. And you're just gonna have to do your best to hold it steady while you plunge in. You can't rest your top fence on anything because of the angle, because it's an inverted angle. So make sure you're like this, nice and flat, and then find your line and then plunge in. So those are all in there. We did not come out here because we were careful. Now we're gonna do this other side. Okay, we're back and we're ready to make some more progress on this chair. Right now we are at a point where we're gonna work on the apron, and I'm gonna show you how to do that. The first thing we need to do is we need to put the front legs onto the chair and make sure they are sitting in the correct locations to where they're actually gonna be. Make sure they're not canted out or anything. And then we are going to measure with a very nice tape measure that I got from Home Depot, and we're gonna see how far apart these legs are. And I am sitting at about 14 and 5/16. That's about 20,000 TIMs. So we're gonna go to the milling machines, jointer, planer, table saw, and we're gonna mill up an apron that is these dimensions that I'm gonna tell you here in a second. Your apron, the stock for your apron should be 1.5. That's your height, by 1 1/4. That's your thickness. And then the other dimension is the length that you need between your legs, which should be really, really close to my 14 and 5/16 number. If you want to be safe, cut that a little bit long, test fit it, make sure it fits good, and then just slowly work your way and shave off a little bit at a time until you get it to fit just right between these legs. So that's what we're going to do right now. The apron is an important piece of the chair because it's going to keep stability between these two legs. It squares everything up. So right now, if we just used our loose tenons and we did this glued up joint, the chair would be pretty strong. It's not going to be the best that we can do. So we're going to put an apron across here, and that's just going to kind of strengthen everything. It's going to make the legs more attached to each other, and it's just going to give the whole front of the chair better stability, and it's going to last a lot longer. That's why we put the apron in the front. So I just cut the apron down. I cut it a little large, and now I'm just going to inch my way. A good way to test if you're where you need to be is I just have it like a touch big, and I kind of forced it up into here. And you can see when this apron's in here, it pushed out my joint. You can see a gap here, and then you can see a little gap on the other side too. So I'm gonna trim that apron down a little bit more in length until that fits nice and tight, but not too tight. What you're really looking for is about 20,000 Tims of strength.
Yeah, they think that we dealing, they talking hot. Yeah, if they opponents and we won't stop till we all touch a million. Don't ever forget, but we probably forgive them on living. Taking the cause that was given, my blessings is already written. Wrapped little ribbon, putting ourselves in positions to making some major decisions. Started from the mud, now you see us going up. Numbers never lie, now you see us blowing up. People used to front, now you see them showing up. So what's up? I've been down and out, but look, I'm trying to get where I'm going.
So I like to use a clamp to hold my apron to the legs temporarily. And then I just, since we have a rounded over edge there and a rounded over edge there, it's hard to really square it up. So I square up the top here, and I square up the top on this side. And then I use a straight edge to make sure that I'm flat across. And once I am, I just give myself a mark across here. Yeah, I'm gonna find relative center here somewhere.
Sugar spice and everything nice, mix it up, now you got a slice. We bridging the gap, they want us to rap, so
that marks where our dominoes are gonna go.
We turn to the max and we never lacked. Hey, yeah, been in my bag, it's a drag, I'm feeling jet lag.
A couple things to note when you're doing the loose tenon, the domino, into the stretcher and the front legs. I set it to just shy of half of the material, and I bored in the same settings, the 50 millimeter domino, 10 millimeter by 50, and the same settings that I was using before, the tight setting. And right now this for me is on 28 for depth. You can see I have 28 there. That's what sets this. That's the height of your cutter. I didn't want to go any deeper because I want the stretcher, I don't want the stretcher to be flush with the front. I want it to be inset. So I want to be able to set this fence now to a greater depth before I plunge into this one. That way, instead of it being flush, it's inset. So from 28, I'm going to lower the fence or raise the fence to 40, and then we're going to do our cuts on the front legs. That way it puts our mortise lower, and when we go to attach the stretcher, it'll be a little bit lower, a little bit inset. That's the goal here. So I just bored this hole right here. This is for the stretcher, and if you look from here, you'll see that these meet up. You'll see that when I put this domino in, it's going to be blocking that. So I can do one of two things. I can either mark that with a pencil, take it out, and then I can cut it, or I can hold this in place with some tape, and then I can just bore it again with the domino, which is what I'm going to do. So now if you look in here, you'll see that goes there. This goes here, and then when we attach our stretcher, it'll be like, you can see there's an inset. We got a domino here. We are going to shape the bottom of this seat, and after we shape the bottom of the seat, we're going to sand everything, and then we're going to glue this bitch up.